has more people than Shabig has.
Okay, okay. Wow.
Therefore, more people to assess. So has more people than Shabig has.
Okay.
Oh, I think I had, yep, all right. We're up and running and live streaming on YouTube. Chip, I'm gonna make you the host.
Okay, in case you have to leave. Okay.
Yep, I am mo so I'm home today with my youngest with 104 fever
Oh
and the
my gosh.
stomach bug. And so I've done pretty well I've been working pretty much straight through since 7, and so she took a nice long nap, but she's just woke up, and as I suspected, she was gonna want her mom. So I am probably not going to stick around. So if you guys have any questions, I could try to answer them, but I'm going to take it to Chip to kind of handle the rest of the meeting as far as when it comes to the electronics.
Okay, sounds good. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I will call the meeting to order at 2:01. We have all 4 voting members of the committee here, plus Vika. I see no members of the public. So we'll go on to item 2 on the agenda. Review the development of the existing asset replacement cost forecasting template. You want to share that online with us, Chip? And
Yep. If you're ready. It's a little scary, but what I what I hope to do, Jim and Jay, just to kind of do the launch, and John and I have been going back and forth in this. What you see over in the left part of the screen is what you kind of saw last week, and that's living in the cloud right now. So John has access. He's gone in and done a lot of work populating with information, and but it's really it's trickier online, and it's one thing if you're creating something and working together, but I think what I'll do is just send you guys a copy of what's here. I can download it and send it as it is as we leave it today.
Hmm.
I don't know, it just popped out there. But of course, it makes sense to me because I made it. But it's like technical documents written by people who know how to use software, um, and they don't know how to ask questions where the average person would as they encounter this. So I'll go through it and just give you a kind of an overall view. Can everyone see? Can they read the numbers on?
I don't have the screen anymore. I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
Oh,
lost it as well.
oh, did it lose it? Okay, I
and
had.
I was
Okay,
frozen.
yeah, you're right.
I was frozen out for about a minute or two at one point too.
I think we all were.
Okay.
It, yeah, it dropped out. Okay, participants can now see the screen. Okay, so you can see the screen here. The numbers, and you, if you can just see the numbers enough to kind of know their numbers. It's not like we're
Right.
going to be discussing in read detail. I mean, we can discuss anything you want, but and I did, along Vika's suggestion, there is a way for people who are learning how to use it to embed instructions in a different cell so somebody can know what that cell is. So in other words, insert the amount each asset gets to the total of the account. So we're trying to do that. When we do go live with this, we'll be able to protect. Unfortunately, Microsoft can't protect the sheet except the entire sheet. But if once we give it, I guess, back to the selectmen to start working with it, we can protect some of the cells. So this first part, we're trying to answer the question of how much are in the reserve accounts is the first question. The final question is how much needs to be put away each year towards so you can replenish and buy a new truck in 12 years or whatever you need. But the first part of it was to use Bob's, this is the Machias Savings Bank thing that you've seen. I call it Bob's work because it's just easier to remember that way. Bob Ernest gave this to us. And these are the reserve accounts. And then the 2025 budget, I don't use in here. I mean, the numbers are in there, but we don't really use it. And the 26 budget. So all of those numbers have been transferred to these columns here. What we wanted to find out was what assets belonged to which account. So when we looked in it, and this is, I know John did a lot of work on this. I'll get to that in a second, but so that's why there are numerous entries in here. The fire department has a ton of stuff, but they all go to the same reserve account. So the question is, these in the reserve account, the ending balance from last year, for instance, in the fire department, and you guys can double check all these numbers, but was 190 and 50,000 is what was added here. This would go into 9025. Here's 190 here, 57.5, I mean 50,000. And the final, what they're proposing for this year is to have, you'll have a working account of 240,000 if they put the 50,000 in there. And that just goes on and on. Now, there were some items which didn't seem to fit into, they had, when I say there was a selectman a couple of weeks ago and had talked about this, and this winds up going on the warrant asking the town, will you spend $10,000, put $10,000 into this account? And you've all seen the pictures of those warrants. So the town office land acquisition, some of these aren't necessarily hard assets, town office. The broadband had a couple of things in it, which is still, I don't fully understand. There's this vehicle account, which has $3,800 in it. And please don't think anything this is any kind of looking at what anybody's done this year. I mean, I have to say, I think that based on the documents I see that the town has to support this, I think Vika does an outstanding job trying to understand these things because she's looking at 3 spreadsheets and the Machias Savings Bank, which changes monthly, and then the asset list, which really doesn't have a lot of helpful information on it. But anyway, these both had 940 in that. So that's oh, Herb's there, admit. I guess I'm okay. Herb, oh, Carol White, Town of Big Island. Am I supposed to admit anyone else? Ask to unmute. Oh, that's Vika, Town of Big Island.
Yeah, so Herb and Carol have joined us. Welcome.
Okay, Herb and Carol. Okay. Then I'll just back up quickly. And this is the spreadsheet that we're working on. And John and I just started working on it together to get things moving and to kind of have a just back and forth of us. John was extremely helpful in populating data into it. what the first part of it, the question is, the end question is, how much can we put in reserve accounts to buy a new pickup truck in 12 years? And so you start with how much is in the reserve account. So that's what this is. This is an online worksheet, which John and I have been building. I think the simplest way is for me to send you a copy, your own copy of this spreadsheet. You can look in it, poke around, check the math, see if it makes sense. I designed it so it makes sense to me, but does it make sense to you as well as a user? So that type of thing, and you'll have your own copy. So if you make a mistake or something, it has no bearing on anyone else. There will be an original somewhere else, which won't be available. So this is just going through the accounts. The say dredging is 90-10. The ending balance was 134. Nothing is put in this year. The ending balance is suggested is 134. And it goes down from that just to copy things that were, I call this Bob's worksheet, which he had from budget meeting a couple of weeks ago. A lot of them are hard assets, so they're easy to say, or we have to start identifying what it does to replace them. Things like solar acquisition development, solar array purchase, land acquisition development, broadband, there's some questions for some of these items. There's two of the same numbers here, 90, 40. But that's basically the accounts as they're listed, the capital reserve accounts as they're listed here. And you'll see they have a lot of subheadings, and I'll show you that in a minute. All of the public works equipment, recycling compactor. That's what these seminary easements and drainage, those aren't necessarily hard assets, so they don't work into the next part of the worksheet. But so there's a lot of these that I don't understand, but they're all there. And so here at the bottom is the 2026 budget, the suggested increases, and these are what I want people to just put a calculator to and do it by hand. Comes up with 775. And that if they put 775 into the total reserve account will then be 3.1. I did a quick math, what is that? What's the impact to the town? I just put in whatever the town budget, I guess, at 4 million. These are live numbers, so if you change them, it changes. Oh, that wouldn't work well. Just shows the impact based on the budget. So I tried to put numbers in here. There will be some instructions embedded in some of the cells, which will give you a little bit more information about what it is. So any questions with the reserve part of this?
Not so far.
Not so far. Okay. The rest of it, now it gets scary. So the first question is, how much money do we have in the reserve accounts? The second question is, how much money do we need? So in order to do that, we took all these in column L came from documents that were given to us, and I won't bother you with it details, but they were documents that were given to us originally mostly by Vika, and this was I think from the auditors. Their auditors' things are still embedded in these lines. The auditors really just said how much it was worth, and then depreciation, which didn't seem to help much going forward. How much an asset's been depreciated? You want to know? The question was, as I understood it, was what do we have to spend the cost to buy it again? So going back, that's the total. What I did was, because a lot of these have items, you may have $134,000 in a reserve account, but there's actually two items in that, which you're going to be trying to say, well, how much do I have for this dredging project, or this part? This makes a little more sense down here. look at the stone wharf. There is at the end of this year, if they do what they plan, adding 300,000, they'll have 928 in there. How many items are in this category? There's 9. You put that in. Anything in yellow you put in. And if you put in 8, it changes it. So these are all can be, you don't have to put 103, but just for simplicity's sake, let's just say each one of those has a reserve fund of $103,000, and there's 9 of them. So here's the item. Here's when it was put in. This is the year the asset was put into service, and the original asset cost. And John, I forget where this original years until replacement, that was in some kind of a spreadsheet somewhere. Was that one of your sheets? Did you put these numbers in, I think?
That came from the original document. It was either the auditors or
Yeah.
it might have been the insurance company that put in the useful life. But
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. You're
so
right.
it's just the
Yeah.
useful life, and they're typically accounting useful lives. So
Yeah.
one of the next steps we need to do is by department sit down and go through it line by line and say, are you ever going to replace this? If so, how many years? And if you're going to replace it today, what would it cost? Because
Right.
I think there's a lot of poor, outdated information in here. For example, stone pier items, maybe if we went out to there's a column in there, when are you going to replace it, or how much is the replacement cost going to be? We might make those all 0 because all of this stuff goes away with the major capital project on the stone pier.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we're basically putting money away now for a larger capital project as opposed to dealing with any of these individual items.
Right.
But the fire department's a great example of sitting down and going through individual pieces of equipment and understand the replacement time. And I tentatively have a meeting. Jay and I are going to sit down with the fire department next Thursday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, there definitely are, and that's why we left these all so there's a fire department, and there's a list of now this shows we applied the entire budget just to do a what if situation for this tank. But yes, they would all have, all the yellows would be, this is originally is 2008. At the time we spent, it cost $7,000. That would mean that it need to be replaced, and they replace it in 25 years. All of those numbers can be changed. But if you leave it as it is, that just means the 2008 gets added the 25, and that's 2033. And how many years is that? Is its checks, it says, well, you need to replace it in 2033. Your current year is 2025, and these are variables. So if you do this, you'll see every number on the spreadsheet changes. So you can put in what year or do what if or whatever. But for updating, I also thought about for updating next year, what does it take? So that's so in 2033 or in 8 years. Now the replacement estimate, since there's no way you can get that quickly, I just used the option of putting in the original amount and saying when that estimate was, which is 2008, and it was 7052. If somebody came up with a new estimate that next year, they would put in the new estimate and then put in the updated year that this replacement estimate. It would be 2025 if they did it this year. So you have nothing, you only can go on what you know. And this model takes in account what it was. And then how many years old is this estimate? It just takes the 2008 to 2025 comes up with 17. The total years used to determine the future price. So you're going to have to do that. This is 17. Actually, this shows. Those are the two variables that get added together. So it says, okay, you've got a price of 7,052. We have to figure out what that would be in 25 years. And what that would be is this original estimate 7052 for times that inflation rate to the power of 25. So that does a compound and now determines a compound increase of that amount over for 25 years, and says you're going to need 18,000 in the year 2033. Again, this is a variable which you can play with, and you can say, okay, I'm going to do 1.03, everything changes. But I left it at 1.04. But this is where people can go in and start to analyze things. They can change. The biggest factor would be, as John pointed out, this number here. If you start to change the years to replace, and that's the good thing about live models, is you can see what's the most important factor. I have no control over inflation. I don't really have control over the investment rate, but maybe we don't need to replace it in 25, and maybe we say 35 years. And all of a sudden, if you do that, well, you only need to have $1,500 instead of. So this is meant to be a working model for those who like working models. And then over at the end of it, it's the investment rate. And that is, what is that going to be worth? What is my account? You can see I've got $240,000, and I'm going to use this investment rate of 1 point. Again, I didn't put in percentage and stuff because that gets difficult to use in terms of how they Excel interprets it. So it's just 1.035 is the investment rate. That can be changed if people don't like it, but and that's to the second power. So because that has to get changed in 2027, right? So eventually the thing is, how much do we need to allocate every year to come up with these replacement costs here? Using these values, and it can't really be hard and fast. You can go in and check the numbers and change them and see what the effect that it has on the bottom line. On the bottom line is that all of these add up to $1 million over based on these numbers, and it's why I want everybody to check it and see if all this logic makes sense. Excuse me, there are obviously some the fire department, as you can go through and see these ticket items. Now this is all paving, and that may be another question where you may want to change numbers in here and say, well, 40, am I going to replace it? We paid $417,000. Am I really going to replace it in 40 years, or am I just going to top coat it? So that's obviously that's a big ticket item, all that paving, and that this is public works stuff, which is easier to get my head around anyway, a truck or something like that. Recycling, this one has, because it has we're missing some numbers in here in years until replace for the compactor and these two compactors, so that throws that number down in the negative. Harbor Master, I'm not sure what this 569 was for. Maybe I should just get rid of it. Probably something I did by mistake.
I played around with some of those numbers.
Oh, okay.
Chip, and in those compactors, there were I think there were 5 listed, and I might have put in a price of a replacement cost of 0 in the top 2, thinking they weren't going to be replaced.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, that could be, and that's why it shows what you And we have to format these so when it shows a number, if there's a number 0 in there, it shows an entry, so you just don't know it's blank.
Right, so
didn't
I
see-
put zeros there
Yeah,
thinking they were
okay.
never going to be replaced.
Okay,
But that's an example of something that we need to go through with Jeff or whomever.
yeah, yeah. And I think that it would be fairly simple to sit down with these. They're just chunks, the harbor master, whatever. These and discuss with them what they think and how those can be changed. Any of those. I'm not sure, the Coastal Access Fund and all those, school playground, cemetery, they have a reserve account amount, but because it didn't seem like it was a renewable asset so much, didn't plug those in, but they certainly could be. Again, the Shippeak Island School was, I think, and maybe John put these zeros in here. That obviously is the bigger the ticket item, the more important the numbers. So that obviously, what are they going to put money?
Yeah, so that's a good example too. So that's got a new school in there and it says the useful life is 40 years. And you can see that if that's true, it says you need to put away $225,000 a year. Well,
Right.
that isn't right. Maybe we need to do some research as to, if you have a new building, what kind of capital reserve does a new building require to, replace roofs, replace, major systems, whatever? Is there some rule of thumb that makes
Right.
more sense for that type of thing?
Right. It's like the roads. You're not replacing the
Right,
road.
exactly.
You're not going to replace the school. So, but this way, you could at least put in those numbers and say, okay, we updated this. So that's kind of where, the money that's in the bank, the money that's proposed to fund this year that started through budget discussions. And then this over on the right, this big $1 million, obviously that doesn't need to be done. There's more work that needs to do this, but if these can be broken down into chunks that people can take a hold of, as you say, you're going to meet with the fire department. Well, you'll have a copy of this spreadsheet with you. You can go through it. You can plug in numbers. You can change them, and then we can keep notes saying these numbers were discussed with so and so on whatever date. They can be put in. You can have notes put in these cells that say if there's a particular note that you need to put in, discuss with Ralph, and we changed it from 25 to 20 years on, 2/7/2025 or something, whatever. So that way people who use it subsequently can know there's a history and what's been done on that number. So that's kind of it. Yeah, add to reserve account and then the cost of replenishment. What do we need to put in savings to pay for this things? So certainly any questions, fire away or because this kind of stuff, it's hard to even ask questions if you haven't had time to work with it. When I send you that sheet, you can start to just poke around, mess around. Again, no problem. It's your sheet. No one will ever use it but you. So use it and see to develop questions or maybe improvements for how this might be be presenting the information. There are a lot of columns, and the reason that I didn't have a lot of these great columns, I mean, you can build a big ass formula which would eliminate all these columns, the whole column. But the formula would be as long as your arm, and it would be very hard for people to correct or use in the future. So I just made all these formulas you can see. The only thing that's fancy about them is these absolute references back to only that cell, like the current year, or only this cell, like 10, that's other than that, they're pretty much, if you look at them, to the power of whatever number of years it was to do compound interest. But there's really nothing, these are, you look around, these are simple formulas. So that was part of it in mind, was just the Pownell thing again was way over my head. And I think have to figure that this tool will be more useful if the typical person can use it with a typical familiarity with Excel now and in the future. So anyway, any questions or anything?
Well, I have a couple of comments. First, Chip, John, this is pretty impressive as I call it a background tool that gets all the minutiae in an organized manner. I do wonder, I guess I'd ask the use question, who needs what information for this, for what purpose? Because I think this level of detail perhaps will be maintained by somebody. It may become Vika's life, but who is it that needs to make a decision from this and in what format? And my gut feeling is that the accounts were created to service a variety of very specific items within groups. And somehow figuring out in what year what needs in each group appear in the aggregate might be useful. But I want someone to say, yeah, that's what we need to know before we run through all the hoops of doing that. The second thing I think it really points out, and you guys get a real gold star for trying this, is we need to update the reality of replacement value and when it's needed. Because clearly, as Chip has shown, you can make different assumptions and get to radically different conclusions. And we need probably some more input from people about how soon does this piece of equipment really need to be replaced and fit that into the model. But it's pretty impressive set of detail here, Chip.
Well, thanks. I couldn't see. Yeah, it is. It's a big spreadsheet with 187 rows on it, and 26, 30 columns. But and as far as I know, and you guys would know, and Jay, you've been on the select board, but as far as I know, this is for them to answer the question. Okay, here's the numbers that we thought this here or what, as of a couple weeks ago, we were going to put in. So do we need to change those? And I don't know, Jay, is this basically what this is for them, for the budget?
I think this is terrific. I think what we need to present and what I think they're looking for is a way to rationally arrive at how much money needs to be set aside for various departments to be able to maintain their current and or future levels of service that they're going to be doing. And this is the first time that it's being looked at with an overall longer point of view. Usually the budget process goes through and, the fire company comes in and Ralph, walks up and down and he wants what he wants and, and sometimes he gets it, sometimes he doesn't. And it's, this really provides a justification for items. And, there's a lot of stuff you don't have to worry about replacing. I mean, on this, as I just go down and look at this, and I need to spend a lot more time sort of being more specific on each one. But I think that by the time we sit down with department heads and so forth and go through with them and get a better understanding of, for instance, fire trucks. What's the real schedule, replacement schedule? And how do we want to do that? Do we want to set aside 60, 70 grand a year? Or do we want to bond them? I mean, how do we want to handle that? And that's another decision, but this will help us make those decisions. So I think this is wonderful. It doesn't mean I'm not going to come back with a lot of thoughts to change things around, but I think you've set this up so that that's the point, is we can look at it and take a look and see where we want to go with it and how we can best use it.
I'm curious, Chip. There's a lot of lines under paving, although I see them only occasionally when you whip through it. Is there any sense of whether that could be consolidated into a single paving line?
It could, sure.
That would simplify this a lot.
Well, what we did was we took what we were given, which was this asset list from the auditors. And so they all appeared on there. So they appear here. But yes, this here, 341, if whatever you did with all these things, that's 341 a year for paving. Now that's probably because, again, I'm talking about replacement costs, and we're not talking about replacement. So as somebody said earlier, we need to change somehow the methodology of things which are just going to be refurbished, like the school or paving.
And I was going to suggest we almost need policy guidance that says this kind of activity will be considered an annual maintenance activity. This
Right.
kind of activity is one we want to reserve for because it's a periodic replacement. And this kind of activity, like building a new school, if we ever get down to that, it's probably a bonding issue. And so it's not for the replacements. So,
Right.
and
Right.
that's that's
if I
beyond
can-
our pay grade.
If I can jump in for a sec, because I got to go, just to answer your question. I think the select board is looking for some guidance and some help prioritizing the number of large capital projects we have. I understand what you're saying. I think there was a capital plan, I'm sure you guys have all seen it, that was kind of kept up to date by Herb for a while. I think the last time it was updated was 2020. And I think, for example, this information comes from the road plan. Probably Herb could answer that better than I can. But the bottom line is, I think that what the select board needs and the town administrator needs is a mechanism to understand, given the magnitude of some of these large projects, what impact that's going to have. How much money can we come up with in-house? How much money might we have to bond? And what impact are we willing to accept on the tax rate? And so I think that's where the rubber meets the road for the community is, we could potentially borrow $20 million. Is the community willing to pay that cost? And, and which projects are, short-term timeline, which ones can be pushed out further as we kind of maybe stagger some of the bonding if we have to. So we have a couple bonds that are about ready to be completed. I think 2 of them in 2027. And so it is a good time to kind of think about, what's our capacity going forward between, a balance between taxes and direct allocations. But my sense is, given the number of capital projects, particularly, marine infrastructure, it's a pretty, like the Stone Pier is definitely a $5 to $10 million project in its first phase. And so, that's, not insignificant. So anyway, I have another meeting I got to head to in Brunswick, but I just wanted to add that. But anyway, it looks great, Chip. And I think this is exactly kind of what we're looking for and how we differentiate between sort of large scale ongoing projects that are not, kind of a one-time capital event. I don't quite know, because I think some of these road projects are still pretty big expenses. So I think that is something that, maybe, finding a way, a policy to differentiate between those two would be good. So that's all I wanted to add. But anyway, I'll try to
Okay.
attend to the extent that I can, but I will also forward you guys the memo we gave to GEI. So they're going to start the design on the stone pier. And we kind of have a pretty much of a vague, cost window we're working in, which they were able to say, well, it's millions of dollars, not tens of millions of dollars. But I do think, between the finance committee and the select board and the engineer, we kind of want to hone that down to something a little bit more definite.
Yeah, Carol, real quickly before you leave, the document that was at the select board meeting on Wednesday, which was the guidance for GEI on the stone pier, there was a blank in there. There was a conversation about, do we give them guidance on cost? And the
Right.
document I saw had blank dollars
Right.
in there. Did that get filled in, or how did that end up
No,
with
so where
GEI?
that is because this work is ongoing on your side. I don't think we
Right.
can give them a number, but I don't want to be one of these towns that has a design that gets completed, but then we can't afford to construct it. So that happens a lot. So I think we'll be working together, all of us, to kind of come up with a ballpark of the cost that we can afford. And this is probably the most, this is the one that's going to happen, well, the quickest, I think. Maybe the barge too. The barge ramp, I don't know. But so I think it will be working with the finance committee and the select board to try to figure out those numbers. And I think first looking at our overall capacity, as you said at the meeting, John, and then maybe honing it down to prioritizing projects and then figuring out. But I think what we don't want to do is just look at the stone pier and shoot the wad on the stone pier and not have anything left for some of these other projects.
Right. So the next item on our agenda is really going to get to that subject. Jay and I sat down with Vika briefly, I guess it was yesterday, to begin to create a snapshot and current status of the major projects. And I think we can pull together a pretty good snapshot because the projects are all at fairly definable phases, with a lot of it being GEI working on 30% designs. But this group needs to decide, how we get our arms around, okay, what can the town afford? It's not the state bonding guidance. It's if taxes are going to go up 5% or some percentage or less every year, what capacity does that create, and what assumptions or data are we going to use?
Yeah, and I think
to
that's the
back
kind
into
of,
that number.
I think some kind of scenarios of kind of, if we borrow 5 million, here's what it looks like. If we borrow 10 million, here's what it looks like. If we borrow 5 now and another 5 in 3 years, so some scenarios and then I think we can probably, I think we have a general handle on the stone pier. It's definitely going to be at least 5, I would say, given what we know, and the costs are not going down on most of these things. On some of the other projects, it's maybe a bit of an unknown, but I think we can get in a order of magnitude range that would give us enough to kind of figure things out. So we should have numbers for the stone pier before too long, within the next 3 to 6 months, some reasonable numbers. And then the Bennett's Barge project, if it's feasible, then we could probably get some numbers pretty quickly on that. So anyway, I'm going to scoot because I'm headed to a meeting, but I'll try to stay
Great,
involved.
thank you.
But I think this is a great start. So
Good. And a similar, when you're evaluating those, I mean, we can set up a similar kind of spreadsheet for evaluation as we get more into the criteria that people could use for what if scenarios. What Carol mentioned that, just one quick question, I'm taking some notes here, 2027, some bonds are due. Is that, they're coming, is that the one from Cumberland?
Yeah, I believe it's the original bonds when we became a town.
Okay,
Some of those are finished in the next
Okay.
couple years. I created a one-page spreadsheet that showed the change in bonding cost over the next 10 or 15 years and shows those dropping off, and broadband continues, but with the broadband we're going to get some revenue back. So
We hope.
I haven't shared that with the group,
okay,
but I'll do that. But that to me is a piece of creating these scenarios Carol was talking about, or getting our arms around, what's the capacity of the town for large scale capital projects. So you're going to share this with copies of this with everybody, Chip.
yeah,
I think a good test is going to be sitting down with the fire department, and Jay and I are going to try to do that hopefully next Thursday and see, and in my mind, the fire department, we've maybe been putting away $50,000 a year. And if you just look at the useful lives on the fire engines, that doesn't appear to be sufficient, but it's a great place to start and understand how this tool works, and begin to come up with a common town fire department plan for replacement of key equipment.
yeah, yeah, very,
And the-
very, it's a big amount.
I could offer some perspective on the road paving if you want to take the time to do that now.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be great.
There was a road committee at one point who developed a road plan starting in 2010. The answer to the question of can those be consolidated is yes. The roads are looked at from an accounting standpoint and a depreciation standpoint, road by road, because if you accept a new road or you abandon a road, you do it whole hog as an individual thing. However, a paving program, especially the mode we're in right now, is going to look at what makes sense, what can be done efficiently. Can all 10 miles of the roadway be paved at once? Or should we do it in 2 sections, or should we do it in 3 sections? And that's going to be a discussion and compromise between what technique we're using to surface the road, the cost per mile of that, and what we think we can afford. And there's a lot of flexibility there. And the problem with a lot of flexibility is that, it's harder to make a decision because there's too many choices. But I think the idea, we can get a cost per mile. We know there's 10 miles of paved roads. And there are mobilization, demobilization costs as well. There's also the hassle factor, the kind of technique that we're using right now, this chip sealing. For a few weeks, it creates kind of, you've probably seen, in the past what we've had to do it, but it goes down very quickly. So we've got a lot of options in terms of how much ground we need to cover and how much it's going to cost us for a given year. Maybe we do 3-year cycles of the 10 miles and something like that. The problem is that the road committee is defunct, and you're not going to find anybody to try to think through that. I could probably offer myself and Mark Dyer to try to come up with a simplified road plan from the one we wrote originally, where we were trying to get our head around all of this stuff. If you wanted to provide some guidance in terms of, and you can't do this without a good number for the chip seal operation. If you wanted to provide some guidance in terms of, like the life expectancy that we were using is much shorter than what you're using. 40 years for a road, you're going to be the last 25 years of that lifespan, you're going to be putting all kinds of maintenance into it. It's really better to do this surfacing thing about once every 10 or 15 years.
Right.
So Mark and I could come up with some parameters and work with you to say, well, should we divide it up into 3 sections over 10 years or 15 years or 2 sections, or should we try to do it all at once? And then you could maybe weigh in on how you think that ought to work, and we could deal with the practicalities of that. And there is other work that this planning is important because it's connected to drainage. So if you're going to replace culverts and you're going to do ditching of one form or another, or there's development in one area and people are going to want to do a road cut to put something across the road, those kinds of things, to the extent that it makes sense, we should try to have in place so that this road plan with however many sections per year can happen efficiently. So that's sort of the thought process that we use that has kind of fallen, that report is probably sitting on a shelf somewhere that no one looks at.
Herb, I know that the road, Division Point Road in our section was done, I think 2 years ago, if I remember.
Yeah.
Impressively fast, I have to say. I was stunned at how quick they were. How many miles of the 10 have been done, say, in the last 3 or 4 years?
Well, we started this in 2010, started from ground zero. We paved the schoolhouse road in 2010 and went on from there. It's been spotty in the last few years, partly because of COVID, partly because of availability of labor, getting the contractors to commit to stuff, and partly because of some problems that we have to solve with drainage. And there's a problem down on the Chandler's Cove Road about placement, whether we want to try to do anything about the placement of that little extension that goes kind of in front of Rodney Harrington's house there. Not Rodney Harrington. What's his name? Rodney McDowell.
The other another Rodney.
Yeah, the other Rod.
From New Hampshire.
Yeah. So that little stretch there is actually, because people have been taking both those corners very wide, has moved towards Roddy's house. And the select board tried at one point to make a decision on that. Are we just saying we're going to keep the road where it is and come and get us, or are we actually going to try and move it? And no decision was made. No work was done as far as I know, except that go ahead. Sorry.
The question I was trying to get to is, if we took the approach that this should be done in 10 years or 15 years, are we on track to just schedule it out starting today and say, okay, years 1 through 3, it's this, or there will be this much done? Or is there a backlog right now that requires more immediate attention? Or are we ahead of the game right now, I guess?
There's a slight backlog. I don't think it's significant. There's that piece that I was just talking about down there. There's another piece out in front of Dowdy's store where there's a drainage easement that they're trying to take care of before they pave that. There's a couple of things like that. The big one was Firehouse Road, which they did last year.
In effect, you're saying if we said it needs to be done every 10 years, we could basically put aside a mile a year worth of paving and say that's what, and whether you do it in 1 year or you put it in a reserve account, it's still It's 1/10 of whatever your cost is. It's a mile of that has to be budgeted for every year in some manner.
Yeah, and it's millions when you add it, when you
Oh, I'm
multiply it by
sure.
10. Yeah, I think we have about 2 million in it right now. We've never borrowed a penny to do it. Which is
And
the
have you
way
done it through the annual budget, or have you done it through reserve account?
reserve account.
Okay.
But every year we've requested a certain amount be put in there, and then when the
Right.
project's ready, we have the money to do it.
So those lines, which I think, Chip, are like 40 lines or something, we could consolidate into a assumed game plan.
Yeah,
Sure.
Once
Yeah.
once we know the right parameter to use, and then Chip has to decide what the inflation rate is. So I think 4% is cheap for construction, Chip, I have to say, but
well, let's, you don't want to see,
we'll
if
play
I put
with it.
this,
Somewhere I've got a table that goes
if I
back
do-
40 years about construction cost inflation. I'll look for it.
well, here's 1.4. If you look at that number on the right, which comes at, and I understand it's inflated because of things like, a third of that is paving, but that's the effect that it has. So that's 1.04. If I put that to 1.06,
Yep,
that,
it doubles.
you gotta, we'll let you take care. This will be your V2 will be Jim's cell.
No, I'm just gonna look at construction inflation.
Okay. No, of course
So-
you gotta.
Moving
I gotta get
along,
my tables out.
Good.
So, okay.
you're gonna share copies of this with
Yep.
Jim and Jay. Herb, would you like to see a copy and particularly look at the paving section? Would that be helpful to you?
If you'd like me to do that, I'd be happy to do that, and I would enlist at least Mark.
That would be great.
Okay.
But
Okay.
let me say that what you offered that I heard was to come up with an estimate of the per mile cost or per some distance cost of repaving in
Yep.
today's dollars, and we can work from that. Okay.
Right. Anything else on this template? We're going to sit down with the fire department. Hopefully on tomorrow, part of the budget review process with the selectmen are department meetings. I don't know what all those departments are that will be there. I plan to attend that meeting, and perhaps I'll have an opportunity to talk about sitting down with Jeff Westcott to look at transfer station, and he might be the guy to take the lead with the public works garage, since he's kind of supervising that work now. But
What
the
time
more we
is the
can
meeting?
bore into these things, it starts at 9.
Okay.
Okay. Next item was review any work done on creating a status report for tracking the accepted projects. So Jay and I sat down with Vika yesterday, only for about 45 minutes, but on the list of accepted projects that we had previously put together, we basically went through all of them. And so in the next couple days, I will write up snapshots of where we stand on each of those major projects and get that to you guys for review. And there's supporting documents. For example, on the Stone Pier, GEI has been contracted to come up with a 30% design. And then there's a simple 3 or 4 page document that talks about the scope of the direction that they were given by the select board. So that to me is what we're looking for in a snapshot, and we don't have any cost yet. So when they discussed that at the select board, they said Carol wanted to provide some cost guidance to the engineers, and ultimately they didn't, but they said, well, what kind of cost guidance could the finance committee give us? And I said, I thought we could say, you know, the town could afford some total number of millions of dollars for projects, but it would be hard to say what projects they should be spent on. And so that's back to the conversation we just had with Carol about it would be helpful to supervisors and it would be helpful to everybody in the community if we had some understanding of if we did a $5 million capital project, what that would do to taxes, or a $10 million project. So I think that's a good approach to getting our collective arms around what's our fiscal capacity for these new large projects. So I'll put the snapshots together and get that out for review and improvement. I'm sure there are a few holes things that should be in there that I don't know the answers to. And I guess I would open it up for thoughts on how we, in an efficient and effective manner, come to grips with what can the town afford over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Oh, go ahead, Jay.
Well, a couple of things. By the 2029 fiscal year, all the town's debt, except for broadband, will have been retired. The school debt will still be there, but that's the fiscal year 29 goes from a total debt of total yearly debt 222,500 down to 178,000 in round numbers. So there's a big drop off when the plow truck gets paid off, the bill to Cumberland gets paid off, and the dredging gets paid off, and that all happens by the end of fiscal year 29. Most of it happens at the end of fiscal year 28. So that just to give you a little bit of an idea. But the bottom line on all of this comes down to every $1 million we borrow is going to cost us about $70,000 a year. So, if we want to spend $5 million on Stone Wharf, that's $350,000 of additional cost to the budget every year. So, those are the things that we need to sort of, I think, keep in the back of our mind. The state of Maine would allow us to, at this point, to borrow up to another almost 23 million legally, but I think that you'd see people moving off the island quickly for the tax bill that was going to generate.
Right.
So, those are issues that we have to be aware of as we've been talking. I'm not quite sure.
Quick
Carol
question.
says, yeah.
What is the total debt service payment that's being made annually that will go away in 2 years? You showed here the principal, but what's the debt service been?
Roughly, the debt service payment, let's say in fiscal year 2028 is 354,000. Add the school in, it's up to 462.5.
But no, what I'm saying is the other way around. The items that are being paid off, what is the debt service that we're paying every year to pay for those right now?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at I don't have my one-page sheet in front of me and I can't open it up because we're on this Zoom, but I think when the bonds for becoming our own town expire, we open up, the savings in debt service is in the $200,000 to $300,000 range.
So using Jay's calculation, the first 4 million is basically a substitute. And after that, it's incremental cost.
Sounds right. Right, and we need to figure out how to paint that picture in a way that's most understandable to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
The annual town budget is around 4 million.
mhm.
I think it was 4.2 last year total. That's school and municipal.
4.2. So borrowing $1 million in Jay's example there for 25 years at 5% cost and $70,000 a year is 1.7% of the annual. That would be a 1.7% increase, right?
Tax
Mhm.
increase. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use ballpark that $40,000 is a 1% tax increase. So it's 42,000
Right. Yeah,
and something
okay.
like that.
So
But
that,
the first 4 million is a wash. Because we're paying for it now. On bonds that will disappear.
Yeah, if the numbers I gave you are correct, I'll get that sheet in front of you. So we'll have that for our meeting next Friday.
Good.
okay.
Anything else you wanted to say about borrowing, Jay?
No, the one of the flies in the ointment, so to speak, is the broadband debt goes out to 2044, and are we actually going to get repaid on that or not, or to the full extent that we were expecting to get paid? And that basically amounts to about 70,000 a year to repay the broadband debt. So,
So-
that we may get reimbursed for that, or we may get partially reimbursed, or we'll see, we have to see where that goes. But the town debt per se, basically, except for broadband, is paid off by fiscal year 29. Not the school debt, but the school, continues, but I'm thinking, well, we have to pay the school debt, of course. Really what we're talking about here, we're not going to build another school building in the near future, or even probably the distant future. But these other projects, we're going to have to start to figure out how much we can reasonably bond for. I don't know what tax increase tolerance is. I know in some communities, some parts of the community, nobody feels it, and other parts of the community, every penny they feel. So,
Right.
anyway,
Well, there is a lot of
Okay.
these, yeah. Even our worksheet, if you cut it in half, if they funded half of it, I mean, it's adds, even those add a lot. Would add a lot.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other piece of the equation. We've been putting a lot of money into the reserve, $500,000 into the reserve accounts for the last few years. I don't know what the whole history of the town is on the amounts going into reserve accounts, or the amounts as a percentage of our expenses. But if they're not sufficient, that's another piece of the equation. So if you only talk about change in debt service, you could be missing, for example, if we haven't been putting enough money away for fire trucks, well, we don't want to be collectively surprised by that.
Right.
Yeah, my sense of it was that probably there was, not knowing or really ever paying a lot of attention to it, there probably was, it just, you look at a number and you go, whoa, that's a lot of money. And then, so right now, the total reserve account would be if with the proposed budgets of a couple of weeks ago, 3.1 would be the reserve account. You look at it and go, that's a lot of money. But if you, and that was to add that as 775, which is what was suggested in here, that's 19%. So it's somehow that has to get paid.
Yeah, that makes me think of another thing. If you leave that 3.1 there, there's lots of categories. The money is set aside for specific things, and we have all the reserve categories. And some of them we can't touch, because the cemetery perpetual fund, and the money that's set aside to do the reassessment. But there are blocks of money that are all basically related to municipal operations or municipal functions. And let's say you've got $1.5 million in 10 different reserve accounts, and we need to buy a fire engine. Well, should we be bonding a fire truck because we don't have enough money in the fire truck reserve account? Or should we be paying for it out of the reserve account and then paying it back over a period of time and saving the interest? So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, would we be better off if there were fewer reserve accounts and there were more flexibility in those accounts?
Let me also suggest some of these reserve accounts were in anticipation of big capital investments. I mean, I think about a third of this is in the Stone Pier, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, the Stone Pier is a big piece.
So the history has been to set aside a fair amount for the Stone Pier that maybe you wouldn't do once you bonded for it, and that would create capacity to do something else elsewhere in the budget.
Well, this stone wharf, is that what you're talking about? Like they're
Yes.
300,000. That, I mean, they have these. You have these. You have one. I don't even know what all these mean, but you've got some of them. Oh, these aren't the floats. This is the actual. Yeah. Right.
This is what the capital project will substitute for
Right.
a
So
while.
these aren't really depreciable assets. I mean, there's some level, but okay. Well,
Yeah. Each of these categories, by the way, is when you look at not just the little, the short version, but when you look at some of the longer versions, are fairly specific, and it's money that's been voted at town meeting to go into that account for that purpose. And it's not fungible. You can't move it around a whole lot. You can redefine a few things, but you're starting to trade.
I totally understand that. I'm just, for example, school department has one that's 91, 97 accounts, school capital, used for overall improvement of the school. If we had one that was municipal government capital and all the money were there, yeah, the taxpayers might be concerned that how the select giving the select board too much power to use it, but it does create some flexibility that at times could be important. That was my only point.
Right.
John, could I interject?
Sure.
I think we discussed this at the very beginning, whether it was better to have sort of more bigger general funds or smaller funds. And I think if you have good planning documents in place to back up all of the concepts and ideas, if you really have that stuff nailed down, then I think you can do that, because you've given people and selectmen have guidance on, what the intent to use in these big pots of money. It's been a struggle to get those kinds of planning tools in place for the capital systems. And the problem is, if you just get the tendency of the government, and especially of elected, let's face it, non-professional selectmen. I mean, I was one. The problem with those is they tend to be reactive. They tend to sort of, be fire putter outers. And I think you need to have something in place that has a much longer look. And so it's either got to be the capital plan, or it's got to be, infrastructure plans that feed into a capital plan that can then roll up into bigger pots of money. But I don't think we're at the place right now where that's probably a good idea. And you can move any amounts of money in these reserve accounts that you want. You just have to hold a special town meeting to do it. And that's not a very onerous job in this town.
Right.
My piece.
Okay, so on the big picture stuff, I'm gonna provide a first draft of the snapshots of the current big capital project status. I will share that one-page document that shows how the debt drops off over time. I think we need to be working on, with debt dropping off over time and some set of assumptions, how much money is reasonable, how much money can be made available for these large projects over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So any thoughts or work people want to do on that, I think would be important and valuable.
John?
Yes.
I've got a breakdown of all the debt by year, by fiscal year, by loan. Would that be of help?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll get you a copy.
Great. So Vika, are you still there? Can you hear us? Okay. We'll come back to that. Next item on the agenda is I provided a real brief outline of what our capital plan or annual report to the selectmen might look like. And since I sent that to you guys, I've added 2 or 3 things in my mind, but my reason for doing that was there's an expectation that we will present a plan to the select board and the community before town meeting. And so in my mind, that's sometime in May, perhaps. And personally, I'm going to be away from like May 2nd to May 20th. So in my mind, I would like this committee to be 90%, have our arms around 90% of what we know and want to present to the community by the end of April. And it helps me personally to think about, okay, what are the components of this work that we need to put together to make a reasonable presentation. So, I said there's an introduction to the report. What were we going to do? What were we asked to do? Did we accomplish? Where are we at? Maybe. Then there's a section on existing assets, and that's this template, and then analysis and replacement costs of existing capital assets. Then there's a summary of major accepted projects, and that's perhaps these snapshots, so that at least at some point in time in May, everybody in the community knows here's the 4, 5, or 6 projects that are being worked on, and here's the status of them. And no, we don't know what it's going to cost to do X, but hopefully we'll know that in 3 months when we get a 30% design completed. Then I think there's some recommendations that we made relative to, and I said fiscal year 26 budgeting, but in all honesty, we got started late. We got started in January. I don't know how much we're going to be able to help the fiscal year 2026 budget cycle, but maybe that's just our recommendations on future budgets and the budgeting process. And then I think there's then the next section, another section is general information. And I'm thinking about this from the perspective of, I see this as an ongoing committee, and 4 or 5 years from now, if somebody comes on the committee, it would be nice to know that here's the state guidance on bonding. Here's what things were normally capitalized. Here's the list of reserve accounts, and they're always on a warrant article in the annual budget. Just that type of stuff. And then the attachments, and that might be a sample of this asset template that we've been looking at today. And then that might be the guidance that GEI engineers were given in 2025 to come up with a 30% design for the stone pier. And so I see it as a repository of important information, but also a summary of our work. So with that said, does that make sense to you guys? Are there things that we need to be thinking about to add to that outline?
I'd suggest 2 extra things, although one of them probably goes in your second line, which is historically, how are existing assets refunded? That is,
Our existing assets, what?
refunded when they need to be replaced or maintained. So just some brief discussion of, here's the existing assets. Every year we've been spending this much on road paving. There's reserve accounts, but I'd put that as part of item 2, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay.
So, but I think we keep having a discussion here about, well, how do we historically pay for this? how do we historically pay for that? Which reserve account does what? I think giving that to people when you're talking about existing assets is important, to say this is the history of how we tackle it. And the second thing I'd add, which is probably after major projects, is a discussion of the history of bonding. That is the thing we've been discussing about, there are these bonds, there's this much debt service per year, they're going away on this year. Just so people have that background information highlighted, not buried in
Yep.
general information.
Okay, I'm making notes.
Yeah, I agree, John. I think any information that they have, and what Jim's saying about information that people understand the assets, I think it's and just where I never knew that it existed, even this asset list, I think, and we did this when we had price increases at over the years with our business, was the more they're educated about what goes into it, people feel that it's just not some random increase and there's not some need for it. So my guess is, and I just, obviously the existing assets and how they're replenished, explaining to people that, okay, you have these assets and they have to be replenished, so you have to put money away for it. And they understand the process, and then they look at it and they see, the more they understand about what it takes to run the town, and what it would take, that the more accepting people will understand, where these things come from and where they're going to. I think they have a general sense of, okay, it's going to be, millions of dollars for the stone pier and this and that. But by the way, it also takes this much just to replace the trucks and building or paving, or, all the stuff that's under the hood that doesn't usually get looked at. I think people would be surprised. I certainly was, how much money it takes to do those and replace
To
them.
maintain a town, yes, it's
Yeah,
not cheap.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's all good. All that information is good, and I'd be happy to work on. I think also that, call it a cash flow, as the bond debt surface. I mean, to make a fairly simple graphic that shows over time how these different bonds are going to reduce and get paid off and get retired, and how that helps them understand, and they see how that works. I think all the existing bonds that we have now and all that debt, I think, I don't, I never knew about it, just as a typical kind of resident.
Yeah, so one thing that is in here, and we talked a lot about today, is, and you're talking about it right now, what's the picture on what's our fiscal capacity for future large projects?
Right.
That really isn't on this outline now, and that's a key thing, perhaps the most important thing for the town and the select
That
board to
may
get
be
their
in
arms around now.
That may be in lieu of the recommendations for annual budgeting. That may be really our fiscal suggestion.
Right. Right. Right.
Incidentally, Chip, I did a calculation of Portland, Maine metropolitan area construction cost inflation for the last 20 years from
Okay.
data I have here. And the answer is compounded, it's 4.5% for the last 20
4.5.
years.
Okay. All right. Well, that's not too far from what I had, so that's
And that's
good.
before we deport all our cheap construction labor.
That's
So
true. And
then one other thing we need to have in our plan is, we were asked to make some recommendations on the structure for the committee, and if anything needs to be in the warrant with respect to making the committee permanent or whatever. All right. We did review the limits on bond debt. Open action items, that's what I was going to ask Vika about. I, are you there now, Vika? I think Vika still owes us the solar array agreement, so we can take a crack at a lease purchase decision recommendation. And Vika owes us a few other things that I asked her for in an email. And
Are we
broadband.
clear about,
we're going to lose Vika for about a week.
are we clear about our insurance in Machias?
I think so, but we should hear it from Vika. The letter that they sent, it used some language that I wasn't clear on. And I actually filed that letter somewhere. But I believe there's some structure that provides FDIC or the equivalent of FDIC insurance to all the accounts. Treats them as separate accounts, even though they're only one account somehow. There was some specific wording in there, but we should double back with the lady and make sure that what I read on the by Googling it was accurate. What do you guys have for other action items? So that's one.
I had a
Follow up on
question
that.
about, I had a question about the priority schedule that Jay sent out, which was useful. But who decides these priorities?
Well, that the idea was that the Board of Selectmen should really make that. I mean, they're the elected
Yes,
representatives. So my thought was present them with a list and say, okay, folks, what's most important? You know, I realize that there are a lot of facets to that, but you know, you can turn around and say 1 through 5 or whatever numbers scale you want to use. You know,
Right.
what's important. And, you know, given that, then you can start to say, okay, so let's focus on exactly how do we accomplish, you know, what's most
Right.
important.
exactly. I just
you know,
was hoping it wasn't us deciding that, because
That wasn't, no, my thought was that this was a list for the Board of Selectmen to,
good. I'm with you.
you know,
Yeah.
look at
Yeah.
and vote. Put your name on the line.
There is a technique I've used in these circumstances that is a little more cover for the selectmen, which is that you ask them to rate each one from absolutely must be done, which gets like a 1, to no, let's don't do it at all, which gets a 5. And then we tally the average score. They all end
Right.
up with like between 1.5 and 2.5, but you get a covered set of priorities without anyone saying, no, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Clearly, I
So-
learned that the hard way. So, yeah.
The way we've all learned most of our stuff.
So anyway, but I think, you know, that was why I set that up that way, was just sort of,
Yeah.
no, I realized that if you're taking a look at a $10 million item that we clearly are not in the market for, although we may want it, you know, that sort of modifies the priority listing. But you know, I don't know. It would be good to have them come up with what they felt was important.
Right. I liked your list. I thought it got to all the key items that I recall. But
I didn't. I tried to make sure I got everything.
Oh, let's come
the-
back to that next week after we look at the summary of where the big projects stand. Because to some degree, they're all being worked on, and
so in
I
some
think-
ways, it's easier to prioritize
and
when
I
you
think
don't know numbers.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes it's easier to prioritize when you don't know numbers.
Well, time will tell. All right, other discussion items?
Just one from me. I've been Basecamp, the thing that we've been using, John. And again, I mentioned Basecamp a while ago, and what we did was John and I just started working with it to try and create a framework of um, action items and sub-action items associated with that. So if Jim and Jay are ready to jump in, I can send you an invitation. You just answer the invitation and then come up with your own password, and you can go in and start looking around. I would be happy to. Um, what I did with John was we met online and we both looked at it. You know, you're looking at it live, and I can kind of walk you through it and show you basically what it does. Um, and actually, Gretchen Jim has used it. We used it a little at the historical.
Yes, I have my tech advisor here to help
So
me.
you got, so it it really is, it's just a way, when you go in and look at it, I think you'll see the number of things that we've talked about, action items over the last couple of weeks is enormous. Um, and to try and get a handle on it. So these are ways to converse about each item. I just wrote down one, added it in, called FDIC. And it's just to create a conversation about that. So whoever works on that can go in and write a note in that about it. It gets distributed to all the members, and they can respond or whatever. The other key thing is that if we talk about the future, or if any additional people join now or 5 years or whatever, they can just slide into a seat and they can see everything that's ever happened all under kind of one roof. So it works real well that way, and it kind of cuts the so if you guys are a game, you know, and look around, and I will be happy to, as I said, meet you online, or if you have any questions about it. Um,
Send
we
it,
can do
send the
that.
link.
Okay.
I'll probably ignore it, but send it anyhow.
Good.
Yeah,
It has the potential to really help us be efficient. You know, like I said, what do we have on our to-do list? So if we're all,
We lost
just
you,
it with
John.
the music program with Chip Herb.
Herb, he was asking about, yeah, we use it.
Yeah,
we use it for-
I was muted. Sorry, I had to find my button.
Oh, no
Yeah, we've used it
problem.
with the music.
Yeah, I think it has the potential to make, committees much more efficient. I have to say, I've used it, been started to use it 2 or 3 weeks ago with the Chip, and I'm still not sure if you put a document out there where you would put it or whatever, but it's a learning curve. So
it has three different, the schedule. You can have calendars in there. These are documents and files. You can just create a digital, and these are to-dos, which can be time-based or whatever, but they're basically all in here. If you look at, for instance, we've been working about the asset list here. These are all our conversations over the past couple of weeks. The other thing that's nice for people who are just want to drop in and check it is it keeps all the activity, everything that's happened, and what it was on reserve account. That shows what I just added or what I've done today, added Jay's documents here. So you can go in and say, I haven't looked at all those emails, or I don't want to look at all those emails, or I don't even have to be attached to every string. But you can go in and just see what's happened over the last whenever. And these are all the people that spoke, and these are all the link. If you say, what the heck's he talking about? You go, and this is a conversation with I have with Vika. So it really is, it takes a while. It'll take, it'll take a month. I'll be happy to answer questions. And don't feel you have to add anything at this point, but just to look at what's been done. And we'll add you into all the strings. So if anything gets published, we'll do it.
Okay, if nobody has anything else, we need to approve the minutes for the 3 January meetings. I've read the minutes. I thought they were fine, so I would make a motion that we approve all 3 sets of meeting minutes.
Second.
Any discussion?
No?
All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 All right. So we're done with that. Anything else anybody wants to? We have a meeting next Friday. We'll focus on snapshots on the major projects and getting arms around what's our big picture fiscal capacity. And you guys will all have had a look at had your own copy of the existing asset update form template. Maybe have some feedback on that.
Good.
Thank you.
Oh,
Enjoy the
good.
weekend.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Good luck Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I've got to turn this off now. Oh well. Well, you can log off. I'll figure it out.
Herb, thanks for offering to take a look at the road stuff. That's fantastic.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you guys
it's a-
for your work.
It's a huge help.
All right.
Very nice. Okay,
Bye-bye.
guys. See you
All
later.
right.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody.